Hello and welcome back to the drag and drop inventory tutorial for Ren'Py part 5, and let's just jump straight back into it, shall we? So in the last part of the tutorial we created an overlay menu which is shown above an inventory item whenever we are hovering the cursor over it. In that menu we got two buttons, one which allows us to inspect the item and the other which allows us to drag the item around on the screen. So far we have implemented the inspect functionality, so in this part of the tutorial we are going to implement the drag and drop functionality. And to do that we are going to scroll back down into the start label and create a few new variables. So we're going to scroll back down and then we're going to create a new line. And this first variable is going to be used to determine if we are dragging an item around on the screen or not. So we're going to call this one inventory drag. And this one is going to contain the value of true or false, and as a standard we're going to set it to false. So we're going to say false, like so. The next variable is going to contain the item that is being dragged around on the screen. So for that we're going to say item dragged, and that is going to be an empty string as the default value. And then the last variable is going to contain the mouse position on the screen. So for that we're going to say mouse pos, and that is going to contain a tuple, so we're going to create two brackets like so, and as a default we can set this tuple to have the values of 0.0 and 0.0 like so. So now that we have done that we are going to scroll back up into our init Python block and we are going to add some code into our start drag function. So the first thing we're going to do is to make two of these new variables into globals so that we can change them inside of this function. So we're going to say global inventory drag and global item dragged, like so. And then we're going to set the inventory drag variable to true. So we're going to say inventory drag is equal to true. And then we're going to set the item dragged variable to the type attribute value for the item that is passed into this start drag function. So we're going to say item dragged is equal to item.type, like so. So now this item drag variable is going to contain the type of item that we are dragging around on the screen. And now we want to make sure that we are triggering the inventory event function to run. And that is because inside of the events function we can check the current event that is happening in the game, such as a mouse movement, and in such a case we want to set the mouse pos variable to contain the current coordinates of the mouse. And then in the update function we're going to use those coordinates in order to place the item on the screen. So in essence the item is going to follow the mouse around as it's going to take its coordinates. So we're going to create a new line and then we're going to say inventory sm.redraw, and then we're going to pass a 0 into that, like so. And now we're going to go back up into the inventory events function right here, and we're going to make sure that we are setting the mouse pos variable to contain the current coordinates of the mouse. So we're going to go ahead and create a new line underneath here, and then we're going to first make sure that we are making the mouse pos variable into a global so that we can make changes to it. So we're going to say global mouse pos, and then we're going to say mouse pos is equal to a set of brackets, and then we're going to use the x and y parameters as the values for this variable, as these holds the coordinates of the mouse. So we're going to say x and y, like so. And now we want to make sure that as long as we're not dragging an item around on the screen, then we can go ahead and show the inventory item menu if our mouse happens to be over one of these items. And that is because as long as we are dragging an item around on the screen, it's not really useful to us to show the menu. So we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to say if inventory drag is equal to false, and then we're going to indent this for loop, like so. So now that we have that done, we're going to go into our inventory update function up here. And in here we're going to check if the inventory drag variable is true, and if it is, then we're going to go ahead and set the correct item in the inventory to have the same position as the mouse. So we're going to say if inventory drag is equal to true. And in here, we're going to create a for loop, which is going to iterate through each of the items in the inventory sprites list. And then we're going to check if any of those items has the same type attribute value as the item dragged variable's value. So we're going to say for item in inventory sprites, and then we're going to say if item dot type is equal to item dragged, like so. So now if this condition is true, then that means that we have identified the correct item that should be dragged around on a screen. So now we're going to position the item so that its center point has the same position as the mouse coordinates, which means that the mouse pointer is going to be in the center of the item as we are dragging it around on the screen. So to do that, we're going to say item.x is equal to, and then we're going to use the mouse pos variable. So we're going to say mouse pos, and to grab the x position of the mouse, we're going to add first 2 square brackets, like so, and then we're going to add a 0 inside of that to grab the x value. And then inside of that, we're going to say minus item.width divided by 2, like so. And then we're going to do the same thing for the y position. So we're going to duplicate this line, and then I'm going to change the x for y and the 0 to a 1, and then the width for height, like so. And now we're also going to make sure that we're setting the item's set order to a high value so that we can make sure that the item never goes behind another item in the inventory as we're dragging it around on the screen. So we're going to say item.set order is equal to, and we can set this to something like 99. So now that we have done that, we're going to make sure that we are returning to this function straight away so that the item's position can be updated depending on if the mouse has moved since the last time on the screen or not. So we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to go inwards in the indentations 2 times until we reach the same indentation as this for loop, and then we're going to say return 0, like so. So that means as soon as this for loop has finished, then we're going to return immediately to this function so that it runs again and then updates the item's x and y positions to the new values of the mouse coordinates. But if we have stopped dragging the item around on the screen, then we need to make sure that we're not returning to this function anymore. So for that, we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to go inwards in the indentations once, and then we're going to say return none, like so. So now we have added all of the necessary code that we need in order to drag an item around on a screen. So let's go ahead and save our changes and launch the game to see what this looks like. So now we're going to test if we can drag an item from the inventory around on a screen. So let's go ahead and add an item such as this lantern, and then we'll open the inventory, and then we're going to press on this hand symbol, and as we can see, now the item is following around the mouse on the screen. But now we don't really have any way to drop this item on anything, so what we're going to do next is to implement a drop feature, which is going to check if we are dropping it on another item and therefore trying to combine it with something, or if we're just dropping it into a random location on the screen. So let's go back into the code and see how we can implement that. So to implement the drop functionality for a drag and drop system, we are going to go back into our inventory events function. And in here, we're going to create another if statement, and this if statement is going to check if the current event type that has just happened is a mouse button release. And if it is, then that could mean that we're trying to drop an item from being dragged. So we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to say if event type is equal to, and then I'm going to go ahead and copy this line right here and paste that here. And then I'm going to swap this mouse motion for mouse button release, like so. And then inside of this if statement, we're going to check if the button that was just released is the left button. So we're going to say if event button is equal to 1. Now before we go ahead and do anything else, we're actually going to correct this event up here, so that instead of saying mouse button release, we're going to say mouse button up. So we're going to say mouse button up, like so. Next, we're going to make some of our variables into globals so that we can change them inside of this function. So the first one is going to be the mouse pause variable. And since we already made it into a global down here, we are going to make sure that we move it to the top of this function instead. So I'm going to cut this and then paste it up here, like so. So now we can access this variable from the very start of our function. The next one is going to be the dialog variable. So we're going to say global dialog. And then we also need the inventory drag one. So we're going to say global inventory drag. And now we're going to create two more variables. And these two variables are going to help us later on in the script by determining whether or not we have an overlap happening between two inventory items or an inventory item and an environment item. So to do that, we're going to scroll back down into the start label. And in here, we're going to create these two new variables. So the first one is going to be called I overlap, and it stands for inventory overlap. So this variable is going to be set to true or false, depending on if we have two inventory items combining or not. And as a default, this is going to be set to false, like so. And then we can duplicate this line. And then we're going to rename this one to IE overlap, which stands for inventory environment overlap. And this one we're going to set to true whenever we have an inventory item and an environment item overlapping each other. And this one is also going to be set to false as a standard. So now we're going to scroll back up into the inventory events function. And then we're going to make sure that these variables are also globals. So we're going to say global I overlap and global IE overlap, like so. So now that we have that done, we're going to go ahead and create two for loops. And these for loops are going to help us to determine if the item that is being dragged around on the screen is overlapping another inventory item. And if it is, then we know that the user is trying to combine these two items. And in such a case, we want to make sure that these two items can be combined. And if they can, then we're going to do something with these two items. So we're going to go ahead and create a for loop inside of here. So we're going to say for item 1 in inventory sprites. And now we're going to check if the current item in this for loop is the one that we are dragging around on the screen. And to determine that, we're going to check if the mouse cursor is currently inside of the bounding box of this item. Because if it is, then that must be the item that we are dragging around on the screen. And instead of having to write this if statement from scratch again, we can copy paste one that we have already made, and that is namely this down here. So we're going to copy this, and then we're going to paste it inside of here, like so. And then we can also go ahead and close this gap right here. And now inside of here, we're going to make sure that the inventory drag variable is set to false, because as we have released the mouse button, we no longer want to drag the item around on the screen. So we're going to say inventory drag is equal to false, like so. And now we're also going to create two more variables, and these variables are going to be local to this function, so they're not going to be accessed by any other function outside of this. But these variables are going to help us inside of this function to determine whether or not we actually combined two items or not. So let's go ahead and create these now. So the first one is going to be called I combine, and this one is going to contain the value of false as the default value. And then we're going to create IE combine, and this one is also going to be false as a default. And now we're going to create the second for loop, which is also going to iterate through the inventory sprites list in order to try and find a second inventory item that the item that we are dragging around on the screen might be overlapping. So we're going to say for item 2 in inventory sprites. And now we're going to check if item 1 and item 2 is overlapping. And to do that, we're actually going to create a new function that we are going to reuse whenever we need to check if two items are overlapping. And to do that, we're going to say items overlap is equal to check items overlap, like so. So the function we're going to call check items overlap, And this function is going to take two parameters, and these are going to be the two items that we want to check if they are overlapping. So we're going to say item 1 and item 2, like so. So now we can go ahead and create this check items overlap function. So we're going to scroll back down to somewhere around here, and then we can create this new function underneath our start drag function. So I'm going to create a few of the lines here, and then go inwards one indentation, and then we're going to say def check items overlap, and then we're going to add our two arguments, which is going to be item 1 and item 2, like so. Now inside of this function, we're going to create an if statement that is going to check if item 1 and item 2 are overlapping. And this if statement is going to look like this. If abs. Now this abs function is a Python function that will return an absolute value based on the value that we're giving it as a parameter. In our case, we're going to create a calculation which is going to determine the distance between item 1 and item 2 based on the center points on the x-axis. But depending on where these items are on the screen, this calculation may result in a negative value, and that is not going to be useful for us. So that is why we want to make sure that the value results in a positive one by using the abs function. And then instead of this, we're going to say another set of brackets, and then item 1.x plus item 1.width divided by 2, like so. So this will give us the center point of item 1 on the x-axis. And then we're going to say outside of those brackets minus another set of brackets, and then we're going to say item 2.x plus item 2.width divided by 2, like so. So now this calculation is going to give us the distance between item 1 and item 2 based on their center points on the x-axis. And then outside of this abs function, we're going to say multiplied by 2, like so. So now if the distance between item 1 and item 2 multiplied by 2 is less than item 1.width plus item 2.width, then we know that these two items are overlapping on the x-axis. But now we also need to check if these two items are overlapping on the y-axis. So for that, we're going to do the same thing again, but we're going to switch the x attribute and the width attribute for y and height. So we're going to say and abs, and then another set of brackets inside of that, item 1.y plus item 1.height divided by 2, and then outside of that, we're going to say minus another set of brackets, item 2.y plus item 2.height divided by 2, like so. And then outside of the abs function, we're going to say times 2 is less than item 1.height plus item 2.height, like so. So now we have a complete if statement that is going to check if the two items that we have passed to this function are overlapping. But because item 1 and item 2 could be the same item, because we are iterating through the same inventory sprites list inside of our inventory events function for both of the for loops, we need to also make sure that item 1 and item 2 are unique items by adding a third condition, which is going to say and item 1.type does not equal to item 2.type, like so. So if this if statement is true, then we know that two items are overlapping and they are two unique items. So now we want this function to return true as we have found an overlap. So we're going to say return true, like so. But if we don't have an overlap between these two items, then we're going to say else return false, like so. So now that we have done that, we're going to scroll back up into the inventory events function. And in here, we're going to create a new if statement. And this if statement is going to check if the items overlap variable is true. And if it is, then that means that the check items overlap function was able to see that item 1 and item 2 are overlapping. So we're going to say if items overlap is equal to true. And the first thing we're going to do instead of here is to set our eye overlap variable to true, since we now have found that there are two items overlapping. So we're going to say eye overlap is equal to true, like so. And now we're going to check what these two items are that are overlapping. And for this tutorial, we only have two items that can be combined, and that is the matches and the lantern. So we're going to say if, and then we're going to add a set of brackets, like so. And then we're going to say, instead of those brackets, item1.type is equal to matches, or item1.type is equal to lantern, like so. Because we could either be dragging the matches or the lantern, we have to check for both types. And then we're going to do the same thing for item 2. So we're going to say, and another set of brackets, item2.type is equal to matches, or item2.type is equal to lantern, like so. Now inside of this if statement, we're going to make sure that we are removing the matches from the inventory as we have used them up. And to do that, we're going to first make sure which of these items are the matches. So for that, we're going to say if item1.type is equal to matches, and then instead of here, we're going to say remove inventory item, and then we're going to pass in item 1 as the parameter, like so. But now if item 2 happens to be the matches instead, then we're going to say else remove inventory item, and then we're going to pass in item 2 as the parameter, like so. The next thing we're going to do is to make sure that we are swapping the lantern's image from the unlit to the lit version instead. So for that, we're going to say lantern image is equal to image, and then we're going to add the path to this image, which is going to be inventory items inventory lantern lit.png, like so. And then we're also going to need to create a transform so that we can resize this image to be half of its original resolution. So we're going to say t is equal to transform, and then we're going to say child is equal to lantern image, and then zoom is equal to 0.5, like so. And now we're going to add this transform as the child to the lantern sprite. And to do that, we're actually going to search for the lantern's index position inside of the inventory items list, and then we're going to supply that index value to the inventory sprites list in order to grab the lantern sprite. So we're going to say inventory sprites, and then 2 square brackets, like so. And then inside of here, we're going to say inventory items dot index, and then we're going to search for lantern, like so. So now the index position of the lantern is going to be grabbed from the inventory items list and then supplied to the inventory sprites list so that we get the lantern sprite. And then outside of these 2 square brackets, we're going to say dot set child, and then we're going to pass in the transform as the parameter, like so. And now we're also going to need to update some attributes for this lantern sprite. So I'm going to duplicate this line, like so. And the first attribute that we're going to change is going to be the item image. So we're going to say item image is equal to, and then we're going to supply the lantern image variable, like so. And then we're going to update the state attribute. So we're going to duplicate this line again. And then I'm going to change this to say state is equal to lit, like so. So now that we have done that, we also want to make sure that the user can see visually on the screen that the lantern has been lit. And to do that, we can use our inspect item screen again. So we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to say Ren'Py dot show screen inspect item, and then we're going to pass in the list of items that we want to inspect, and in this case it's just going to be the lantern. So we're going to say lantern, like so. But now we also want the character to say something about the lantern being lit. But because we also have the inspect item screen visible, then we're going to run into a bit of an issue where both the inspect item screen and the character say screen are going to be waiting for the user to click with the mouse in order to progress. So in order to prevent that, we're going to make sure inside of our character say function that we are not showing the character say screen, but instead we're going to allow the inspect item screen to show the character screen after it has been hidden. So in that way, we're going to make sure that the screens are being shown one after the other instead of at the same time. So we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to say character say, and then we're going to say who is equal to clear, and what is equal to 2 square brackets, and then we can have it say something like the lantern is now lit, like so. So now to fix the issue that I just talked about, we're going to add a new parameter to the character say function, and this parameter we're going to call inspect item, and it is going to contain either the value of true or false, and if it's true, then we know that we also want to show the inspect item screen as well as the dialog. But if it's false, or if we omit it altogether, then the character say function can go ahead and show the character say screen. So we're going to create a comma after here, and then we're going to say inspect item is equal to true, like so. So now we're going to scroll back down into the character say function right here and add this new inspect item argument. So we're going to add a comma, and then we're going to say inspect item, and then we're also going to supply a default value for this argument, and that is so that if we ever call this character say function and we don't want to supply a value for this argument, then the argument is going to default to this value. So we're going to say is equal to false, like so. And now we're going to make sure that as long as the inspect item argument is set to false, then we can go ahead and show the character say screen. But if it's set to true, then we want the inspect item screen to handle that for us instead. So we're going to create a new line underneath here, and then we're going to say if inspect item is equal to false, and then we're going to indent these 2 lines, like so. And then we're going to scroll back up into the inventory events function right here, and in here we're going to make sure that we are restarting the interaction as well as redrawing the inventory sprite manager. So we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to say inventory sprites dot redraw, and then we're going to add a 0 instead of that, like so. And then we're going to say Ren'Py dot restart interaction, like so. And the last thing we're going to do inside of this if statement is to break the second for loop. So we're going to say break, like so. And now we're also going to make sure that we remember to set the iCombine variable to true inside of this if statement. So we're going to say iCombine is equal to true, like so. So the next thing we're going to do is to make sure that if the user is not trying to combine the matches and the lantern, but is trying to combine 2 other items instead that cannot be combined, then we're going to snap the item that we are dragging around on the screen back to its original position inside of the inventory. So we're going to go ahead and create an else statement underneath this break statement and make sure that we are in the correct indentation, like so. And then we're going to say else item dot x is equal to, and now we're going to use the original x attribute that we have given to each of the inventory sprite items. So we're going to say item dot original x, like so. And then we're going to do the same thing for the y axis. So we're going to duplicate this line, and then we're going to say item dot y and item dot original y, like so. And then we also want a character to say something. So we're going to say character say who is equal to clear and what is equal to 2 square brackets, and then she can say that doesn't seem to work, And then we're going to add another piece of dialogue. So I'm going to add a comma after these 2 quotation marks. And then I'm going to say, try something else, like so. And now we also want to remember to reset the item's set order to 0. So I'm going to create a new line above here. And then I'm going to say item.setOrder is equal to 0, like so. So the next thing we're going to do is to make a small correction inside of the character say screen. So we're going to scroll back down until we find it. Right here. And in here, inside of the remove from set action, instead of supplying the index position of the item that we want to remove from this what list, we are going to supply the actual value that we want to have removed. And that is the correct way to use this remove from set function. So for that, we're going to copy paste this section. And then we're going to paste it instead of the 0, like so. And then we're going to add 2 extra square brackets. And then we're going to say 0 instead of that, like so. So now we are removing the first item inside of the what list from the dialog dictionary. And now another thing we're going to fix is inside of the inventory events function. So let's go ahead and scroll back up there, right here. And inside of this else statement, we're going to make sure that we are renaming the item to item1, as that is the correct name for the variable that contains the item that we are dragging around on the screen. So we're going to say item1, like so. And then we're going to do the same thing up here in this if statement. So we're going to change all of the items to say item1 instead. Like so. And then we're going to correct one more thing inside of this function, and that is this line right here, where we are saying inventory sprite redraw. It should of course say inventory SM redraw, as we are referring to the sprite manager object and not the inventory sprites list. So we're going to rename it to inventory sm.redraw, like so. So now we can go ahead and save our changes and launch the game to see what this looks like. So now that we are back inside of our game again, we're going to go ahead and first of all open up our inventory, and then we're going to add the key and the lantern to the inventory, like so. And now we want to try to see what happens if we combine the key and the lantern. And as we can see, we get our character to say that that doesn't seem to work and that we should try something else. And we can also tell that the key went back to its original position in the inventory, which is exactly what we want. So in the next part of the tutorial, we're going to go ahead and make it possible to combine an inventory item together with an environment item. So I thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.